My name is Damien, and I have been surviving in the town of McDougal ever since it vanished on the evening of April 28th, 2018. I live in a small, isolated house in the middle of the surrounding woods, about half a mile outside of town proper, with my friend Sam. I say vanished, because to the rest of the world, I'm sure that's precisely what happened. From what I've been told by those arriving after the fact, that's the day that McDougal completely vanished from the map, or at least its people did. Supposedly, all of the buildings, cars, even food that was being eaten that day all remained. For us, it was more of the rest of the world simply vanishing. Granted, we could only go as far as our cars could take us, but every town we came across, every city, every state was abandoned. Even massive metropolises known for housing millions of people were void of human life. To us, it wasn't McDougal that had disappeared. It was the rest of the population, leaving only our small town of 2,000 people as the last bastion of humanity in an empty world. Before anyone asks, no, I'm not here to tell you what happened. I'm not going to tell you what we discovered on our expeditions outside of town. I'm not here to tell you why this happened to our isolated community. Not that I even could. And I'm not here to offer an explanation as to why you had the misfortune to wind up here. Honestly, I try not to think about that stuff. Maybe if there's enough interest, Sam can talk to you about that in a follow-up post, or in the comments. My purpose today with this post is simpler, more fundamental. Lately, I've been seeing a lot of new faces in town, the few times I've actually bothered to head down there. There was a time that wasn't always the case, and it was only ever those that were initially pulled in after the entire town I call home seemed to become isolated. But over the past few months, we've been getting a slew of amateur podcasters, self-labeled urban explorers, so-called paranormal investigators, even the odd military man suddenly arriving overnight in town. They always say the same thing, that they fell asleep within the walls that used to house the residents of McDougal, and then they wake up here, with us. Most of them don't last a week, some don't even last their first day. So at Sam's behest, I'm offering this post as a basic guideline. I'll run you through what the average night looks like for him and I, so you can model that routine and not wind up as another victim. Personally, I don't care if you heed my warnings or not, but Sam is adamant that we have some sort of duty to keep newcomers safe. So if for no other reason, just pay attention for Sam's sake. The following took place last night, and is a good, all-encompassing example of what you can expect now that you're stuck here with us. At 4 hours until midnight, darkness begins to loom over the trees surrounding our small home in the woods. Before night fully falls, Sam and I work together to inspect the house's entrances, front door, side porch, windows, everything. We ensure that the wooden boards we use to block them off are secured, that it's impossible for anyone or anything to get in. Some days we discover that the boards are shattered or forcefully pulled away from the house, and we replace them. Once we're just about done, I leave him to finish up and perform one last check on our surroundings. Make sure I don't see anything moving in the veil of brown and green surrounding us. During the daylight hours, the woods serve a number of purposes, such as isolation from people I don't wish to deal with, natural cover from any new threats, and as a source of small game in the form of squirrels and rabbits, even the odd deer if I'm lucky. At night, however, they serve as a place for panicking people to get lost, and as cover for the repeaters. If you don't know what those are, look at the name and think for a second. You know those people around town who have the same conversations with clearly different people, knock on doors to abandoned buildings and go inside, or those who walk the exact same way for the exact same amount of time. Notice how they do those things day after day, with no alteration? Yeah, those are repeaters, and they're more dangerous than you think. We don't get many out this way, but there are more than a few who are trapped in the cycle of hopelessly wandering the woods, so we keep an eye out. At 3 hours to midnight, we get inside the house and lock the front door. Light some lanterns and candles for light. and make sure anything that we could step on or stumble over is out of the way. Next, we check to make sure there's nothing causing any noticeably audible noise that can be heard from outside. Sometimes that means one of us going back out and listening while the other checks an appliance, especially if it's something new. We have to be thorough after all. If our dishwasher or laundry is running, we stop it. One thing you need to learn quick is that anything is better than breaking a repeater's pattern. Soggy clothes, missing shoes, a bruised elbow, anything. I don't care how much you hate leaving something unfinished or how much you need the air conditioning going to be able to sleep. If using an object or completing a task would interrupt a repeater, leave it. It's not worth your life. At 2 hours to midnight, we do a weapons check. Disassemble our guns, make sure they're clean and in working order. We check how much ammo we have, make sure we have the right ammo. For us, that's 30.06 for our Winchester 70 and a .45 ACP for our 1911. Technically, you don't need bullets with that much stopping power. Anything that can drop a human target reliably will suit you just fine. But be warned, the repeaters can take a lot of damage, way more than you would think or expect. So stopping power helps a lot, buys you time. We also keep at least one close quarters weapon on us, usually something that stabs or bashes. For me, that equates to a 10-inch hunting knife my father gave me for my 18th birthday. If you're like Sam, that means a baseball bat, something powerful enough to stop something coming at you, but not lethal enough to kill it in one hit. Usually, you don't need those exact items. Anything that works against closing in threats is perfectly adequate. Ideally, you don't want anything getting that close to you. That's what the guns are for, but it's better to have and not need than to need and not have, as the saying goes. At 1 hour to midnight, we figure out who's staying up on watch. We get our plan together, make sure we're both on the same page. Last night's conversation went something like this. I can keep watch tonight. You've been staying up the past 3 nights now. It's not good for you, man, Sam said as he sat opposite to me at the small circular kitchen table. He fidgeted with his fingers, a kind expression written across his face as he leaned forward. I'm fine, I don't mind sleeping during the day, I rebutted, ignoring his silent pressuring. We could always switch the shifts, like I recommended. I knew his offer was sincere, but I didn't like the idea of trying to set that up in just 1 hour. No, too risky. Sam sighed and rubbed his forehead, clearly exasperated with me. It's not like we'd be screaming at each other, Damien. Just shaking the other awake, making sure they're good, and... I said no. Damien. Sam's voice sounded noticeably worried, despite his efforts to hide it. Sam, I'm fine. What we're doing works, and we don't have time to change it. We can talk about it in the morning if it bothers you. Which it does, he said somewhat sternly. Then think of a good argument for it. Maybe you'll change my mind. Good night, Sam. I think he realized that I wasn't budging on this one. Not tonight. Without a word, he pulled the 1911 from behind his pants and set it on the table in front of me. At least hold on to this then. I stared at the wooden handle of the pistol for a moment, the recently cleaned iron shimmering in the candlelight. What if you need it? I already have the rifle, I argued, pulling it up from under the table and setting it in front of me. Sam shook his head. If we're not doing shifts, there's no point in me having it. The people out there are getting worse, and I'm worried. I noticed his voice catch in his throat, and he seemed to fight something back. He always worried too much, poor Sam. A pang of sadness ran through me as he cleared his throat before continuing. I'm worried there's going to be more than you can take with a bolt action. You need to be able to handle them fast if worse comes to worse. So please, take it. I'll hear you if you fire anyway. I wanted to argue more, point out that if rifle fire did wake him up, he would easily be able to rush to my defense and use the gun if he still had it on him. Besides, for all his talk of wanting me safe, I wanted him safe too. There was, after all, a window in the bedroom, boarded up, secured maybe, but there was a good chance it wouldn't stay that way. Still, this was clearly important to him, and more pressingly, we were short on time. So I relented, sighing as I took the strap on the rifle and slung it over my shoulder. "Safety's on," Sam reminded me, as I took hold of the pistol and slipped it neatly into the back of my trousers. I nodded at him and saw a faint smile of relief cross his face as he sat back, the candlelight only just barely revealing his short blonde hair and green eyes. There was a silent thank you in his expression, one that I'm sure was supposed to make me feel better. All it did was make me seriously consider shifts after all. Midnight. Sam was asleep, or at least he better have been. I'd given him my room for the night as I sat on the couch that normally served as his sleeping spot. The room was bathed in the soft candlelight from the center of the old coffee table. In the light, I could see the outlines of our old television, some old photos depicting either Sam's family or mine. The old recliner I'd sit in when we'd watch TV in the odd case we had a lazy day, and, of course, the front door, locked and secure. Anything beyond that was only vague shapes. The candlelight was just bright enough to reveal their presence, but did not extend deep enough into the darkness to expose their details. A large circular disc denoted the kitchen table, and a few rectangular blocks were the only indication I had of our refrigerator, cupboards, dishwasher, and sink. That is to say, nothing of the small gap behind me, leading to a small hallway that, though I knew led to the bathroom, laundry room, and bedroom, appeared to be nothing more than a deep wall of blackness. The thick dark caused my chest to feel heavier as I observed it, and I felt my grip on the rifle tighten. I did my best to keep my mind from wandering or succumbing to fear, instead keeping close attention to any noise I heard around the house and outside. Every so often I would look at the watch given to me by Mother before I left home, noting the time so I'd be ready for each event. 12:52 a.m. was when things truly started. While we had mostly boarded up the window overlooking our front yard, there were still small slits between the boards of wood that we could use to peek out if necessary. Unfortunately, this also meant things from outside could look in once they got close enough. We kept our windows ever so slightly open at night. If you don't have any major activity by your home, you obviously don't need to do this, as it is a risky, oftentimes unnecessary gamble in the event you or something in your shelter makes noise. For Sam and I, however, it was the only way we could hear the approaching footsteps and of our first visitor. Upon hearing the telltale signs of crackling twigs and old leaves, I moved away from the couch, stepping slowly to the side of the window as I clutched my rifle close to my chest. My heart began racing, and I forced myself to hold my breath. For a moment there was nothing, as whatever made the sounds outside my home silently peered inside. A deep groan filled the air as I took another cautious step away from the window. Out of the blackness, in flickering light, I saw burly-looking fingers curl around one of the planks of wood as the first repeater lifted a long, dead flashlight to my window. "Hello? Is anyone in there? I need a little help." The man's voice wasn't threatening in the slightest. If anything, it was slightly pitiable. There was a shakiness to it, a tiredness, like he was trying to catch his breath. I said nothing. No one had been here the night he arrived looking for help, and so no one could be tonight either. As the man gave 3 soft pounds against the wood, the man peered closer to the window. I could just see his shape leering close to the window, using the free hand to hold over his eyes, lifting the dead flashlight higher through one of the cracks. No doubt he saw the candle, which of course hadn't been there the first night either. Thankfully, that deviation was so small it meant next to nothing. "Hello?" asked the man again. I kept still, my finger twitching as I fought to keep it off the trigger. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes passed as the lifeless flashlight passed over and over across the window. "Please, I'm lost. I just need some help." The man's voice was soft, pleading. I did not respond. I could not respond. It may seem heartless, but he was too far gone. After a minute more, the repeater gave up with a defeated sigh and loudly began to stomp away from the window. I didn't immediately return to my spot on the couch, instead waiting a few more minutes until I could no longer hear his stomping. or his defeated gasps of breath as he left. After I was satisfied, I let out the breath I was holding and sat back down, trying to force my chest to stop pounding through deep, calculated breaths. The next few hours were calm, save for the odd scratching and whispers asking if anyone was inside from the few people who'd found us from time to time. These repeaters, thankfully, had not peered through the window as the first had, so I needed only to keep my rifle at the ready, just in case something set them off. Another valuable lesson: if a repeater has no reason to see you, don't give it one. Stay out of its sight. Don't make a sound. Don't interrupt its routine. They'll leave you alone, usually. 3:52 a.m., the night was almost over, and I had only one visitor left. This last repeater was technically our first, one we had encountered in the first few days our town became isolated. A lot of people broke down in those initial days, and most of us were too frightened, and frankly too busy panicking to focus on the repeater problem. That led to a lot more of them, including the one I now had to face, the one I had to turn away. Taking a deep breath, I sat up from the couch and made my way to the door, checking the bolt of my rifle one last time. I was only slightly relieved to see the brass casing reflecting a soft bit of candlelight back at me. With any luck, no ammo would be spent tonight. If you must deal with a repeater, try to learn exactly what their routine is and mimic it to the best of your ability. Think of it as an acting exercise. Try not to mess up and be ready. Carefully stepping by the front door, I checked by the nightstand beside for the flashlight I kept there. Sure enough, there was a bright red chunky plastic flashlight I used specially for events like tonight. Steeling myself, I slung the rifle behind my shoulder, just out of sight, and took the small twisting metal on the doorknob in my hand. After a soft twist, I heard the barely discernible clicking of metal as the door unlocked. "Stay calm. You know what to say, what to do," I said aloud to myself. Swinging the door open, I gently stepped outside into the cool night air, chirping crickets and cicadas quickly filling my ears as I took in the near pitch blackness of the tree line underneath the starless, cloudy night sky. I counted the seconds as I gripped the strap on my rifle tightly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 seconds. The first signs: deep breathing, panting, the cracking of leaves and snapping branches. "Hello? Anyone?" came a distraught voice from the woods. Even all these years later, the pain in his voice was unmistakable. "Can anybody hear me? Please, it's my daughter," he begged. I could see the tears on his face even before he became visible. My turn. "Hello? Who's out there?" I asked, pitching my voice ever so slightly higher. The truth is, it was Sam who had been out here all those nights ago, unable to sleep, trying desperately to reach his mom on his phone. In the distance, I saw a man stumble out of the woods and fall onto his hands and knees, huffing as he laid on the rocky road leading to the house. He was still too far away to see any features, but I could hear him panting, his breaths raspy as he desperately sucked in air. "Sir? Sir, are you okay?" I asked, with false concern. The frame of the man turned, still huffing as he stumbled up. The shuffling of rocks signified him getting closer, and I fought the urge to ready my rifle as my focus deepened, ready for anything. "Please, please, you have to help me. It's my daughter. One of those things got her," he exclaimed as he stepped closer. I had no idea what the man looked like as he stopped a few feet from the steps leading up to our porch. There was only enough light from the clouded sky to reveal his shape, huffing, puffing, wheezing. "Those things? You mean the repeaters?" I asked in Sam's voice. The figure nodded frantically. "Yes, she got in their way, and they took her into the woods. I need help. Please, I need to find her," he begged. I pretended to acquiesce. I'll go get some help, just stay there." Without another word, I walked back to the door while keeping an eye on the figure, calmly opened it, and stepped inside. Technically, this was a deviation. Sam had been somewhat frantic that night, nearly throwing open the door as he rushed inside. His clattering had been what woke me up that night. sounds I most certainly hadn't been making. These types of deviation are fine, so long as they don't interrupt the repeater or drastically alter the events they're trapped in. So I grabbed the flashlight by the door, then proceeded to wait several minutes. I kept a close eye on the repeater through a small peephole as time crawled ever so slowly. Even though I was playing my part, there was no guarantee that everything around me would play out exactly the same. We were in the middle of the woods, surrounded on all sides by wildlife. Wildlife that by its very nature was unpredictable. It's best to keep an eye out when you have such a massive variable, one you can never fully account for. The repeater, for his part, never deviated, following the same pattern I'd seen for years now. Exhausted huffing, placing his hands on his head and pacing as he waited outside, holding his arm periodically. 4:01 a.m. I could feel my stomach drop. Forcing myself to take a deep breath, I slung the rifle so I held it in one hand, tucked the flashlight under my arm with the other, then opened the door. I quickly shifted the flashlight to my open hand and flicked it on as I stepped outside, focusing on the repeater. The repeater, just like always, winced at the sudden light and turned to face me, holding out a dirt-covered, scarred hand as he backed away slightly. His thin autumn coat was torn, ripped in several places, and revealing hints of a long-sleeved t-shirt. His grass-stained jeans fared no better, small holes revealing scabbed skin in some places, and fresh cuts in others. Even all this time later, I pitied the man. When I'd first encountered him, his clothing had looked almost brand new, but years of reliving the worst day of his life had left them just as broken as he was. "Just focus. You're almost done," I told myself. What did you say to my friend? Why are you even here?" I asked harshly, using my own voice this time. Like everyone else, I'd been confused and scared at the time, and on that particular night had just experienced a sudden and unwanted awakening. If I could take back what I said, what I did, believe me, I would. Instead, I watched for the 1,000th time as the man blinked rapidly, squinting as he fought against the light. His voice shook when he tried to respond. I was just asking for help, I swear. My daughter, she was taken. I'm trying to... At this time of night? What's wrong with you? You're gonna get yourself and probably us killed," I yelled, interrupting the man. I hated the venom in my voice. I hated the startled yelp the man let out as he raised his hands in a non-threatening gesture, pieces of fabric dangling from his arms. Most of all, I hated what I'd missed all those nights ago. The sight of the man crying, barely holding it together. "Please, I just want," he tried to say, his voice trembling. Again, I interrupted him. "I don't care what you want. You need to leave. Now." The repeater's expression dropped, shaking his head in sheer disbelief and despair as he opened his mouth to speak again. My heart leapt up into my throat. No, I thought. In an instant, I turned to my left, shining the beam of a light towards the small gravel driveway that housed my car and our trash cans. In the light, I could see both trash cans, both of which should have been standing. Instead, I could see one of them tipped over, trash spilling on the ground as a raccoon obliviously picked away at the escaping pile. My grip around the rifle tightened, and I could feel my flashlight hand begin to shiver. Crap, I thought. A deviation, and a big one. Turning back to the repeater, I could see his expression and demeanor change in an instant. His fear, his despair, his pitiable stance were all gone. In their place, I saw a hardened, almost animalistic rage in his eyes, fists clenching so tightly that I could see fresh blood dripping from where his long, dirtied nails dug into his skin. His attention was divided between myself and the offending raccoon, his huffing breath turning into a heaving growl as the white in his eyes turned red. "Crap," I said aloud. My mind went a mile a minute as I tried forcing myself to calm down, taking deep breaths and steadying my hands. "I said you need to leave now," I said in a shaking voice, trying desperately to get the repeater to recognize his routine. The repeater only growled louder, veins beginning to become visible in his hands and in his face. Without thinking, I dropped the flashlight and heard it clattering to the ground as I raised my rifle, aiming at the repeater as it became half bathed in light, half shrouded by darkness. "Don't make me shoot you," I shouted, my voice trembling as I trained my scope on the repeater's chest. I regretted the words as soon as I said them. This was another massive deviation. As poorly as I handled the situation years ago, I'd never threatened to shoot the man. Any chance I had now of keeping this from escalating was gone. The repeater grit his teeth as he hissed in reply, his eyes becoming almost completely red as blood freely poured from his hands. Suddenly, the man roared, pouncing from a dead stop as he leapt forward, screaming as he charged me at full sprint. "Crap!" I yelled in a panic, followed immediately by an ear-shattering bang. The shot had been both a reflex and intentional all at once, as it echoed across the formerly silent woods. Quick, easy, without thought. That's the only way to deal with one attacking you. No mercy, no thought as to who they are or were, just rapid and decisive force. The shot hit the charging repeater in the chest, the force of the round twisting his body as he stumbled and slammed into the ground. I quickly cycled the bolt, the sound of the empty brass casing hitting the wooden porch almost completely drowned out as the repeater screamed in fury, fumbling with its hands to push itself back up. The monster rose his gaze to meet mine, its eyes practically dripping with fury as it roared, spit and blood flying from its lips as it tried to push towards me. A second crack and bang left my ears ringing, and my head felt like it was almost splitting open from a sudden headache, a painful reminder that I'd forgotten to wear any form of ear protection. In the moment, I hardly cared about that, however. My attention was focused on the man I'd just killed. His head was a mere fraction of what it was, now shattered and split partly open. Shards of his bloody skull were visible in the beam of the flashlight, and I found myself feeling sick to my stomach. Even knowing what he was, I felt a twinge of guilt welling up in my stomach as a wave of exhaustion swept over me. This was twice now I had killed him, I realized. Thoughts of him somehow getting better and returning to himself flooded my mind for an instant before falling away, replaced by the sight of his lifeless body. I'm sorry, was all I could say as I lowered the rifle, my hearing slowly retuning to me as I took a step back. Damien? Damien, what happened? Are you all right? I heard the panicked voice of my friend shout. I'm fine, Sam, I'm fine. I lied as I cycled the bolt a second time, letting the expended round fall to the ground outside before stepping back inside, my eyes never leaving the body in front of me. Even as I closed the door, I could hear the distant sound of 2 more screams somewhere in the woods. More repeaters. More people who'd gotten lost in the woods. More people who'd lost hope. Sam and I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Occasionally, we'd hear a rabid repeater slamming against our windows or our door as they screamed, held our breath as they tried bashing their way in. Morning came before they could make progress, and for whatever reason, they fell back into their routines. I'll let that be the last lesson, before signing off and leaving you with this post. If you have the ability to, hunker down and hide from the repeaters if you suspect they'll come after you. You won't be able to outrun them. If there's enough of them, and believe me, make enough noise and there will be, you won't be able to outfight them. Just hide. Hide and pray they don't find you. Try to fix whatever damage they do when it's safe, then get ready to deal with them again. If you have any other questions, leave them here, I guess. I'm sure Sam or myself will get to them at some point. Above all, stay safe. Try not to give up. We don't need more of them around here. Edit. Sam just informed me that he'll be posting his follow-up. Here it is. Hello everyone. This is kind of a follow-up to the post my friend Damien made a little while back, just to kind of help explain things a little better. I'm not really sure how to begin this, so I'll just start by introducing myself. My name is Sam, and I'm about 27 years old as of 2025, assuming time still works here the same way. And just like everyone else who was in McDougal on the evening of April 28th, 2018, I am now stuck here. and it looks like we are all that's left. At least, we're all that's left in whatever version of McDougal we've been, I don't know, teleported to. If you've read my buddy Damien's post, you'll know why it's kind of a weird subject. Damien tells me that a few of you were asking for more details. What happened, how this started, what we found, all that stuff. I'm not really sure how much I can definitively tell. I mean, even for us, it's mostly just speculation. But I have at least looked into it a lot more than Damien has. So hey, maybe I can help. There's only been a few comments or questions, so I'll try and fill in the blanks where I can. I guess the best place I can really start is a few months before McDougal vanished. I officially turned 20 years old on February 13th. That day, my family decided to have a small get-together at the local church for a celebration. Honestly, most of the details there don't really matter, so I won't focus on them too much. However, one of the birthday presents I got from my mom was an old journal that used to belong to one of my ancestors, someone who happened to be an old army vet that fought from the 1830s through the 1840s. I know that probably sounds like a weird gift, but I've always been fascinated by history, and especially by family history. So to me, this aging and yellowed book was practically the holy grail of birthday gifts. I spent maybe a week looking through the journal, learning all about a man named Timothy. For the most part, what I read was stuff that only people like me would really be interested in. I learned that Timothy was born to a small family of fur traders in 1802, that when he was 7, his father taught him how to skin a rabbit. At 13, he had his first midnight tryst, and other tiny things like that. Just enough to remind me that the old names and faces I was reading about were more than just that. They were people just like you or I. Sorry, you're not here to listen to me play show and tell. Back to what brought me here. There was an entry in the journal that started around 1835. Timothy had deserted his post in an effort to avoid a local war, taking his wife Agatha and 2 children, Mildred and Thomas, north in an effort not to be discovered, along with 3 other soldiers and their families. I can speculate with a fair level of confidence what war I think they were trying to avoid, but that's not really important right now. What is important is that almost from the moment they arrived in a then unnamed settlement, Timothy's handwriting suddenly became scratchier. What once had been neat and sophisticated cursive now seemed panicked and less focused. I'm not sure if anyone here has tried to write anything when they're scared or anxious, but it's almost like you can see where their hands were shaking, or at least I could. The writing spoke of bizarre locals who did the same thing over and over, day after day. It spoke of how some of them would wring clothes after dipping them in non-existent baths of water, while others would walk up to an empty stall and ask for the price of a fur, or some other good that wasn't actually there. About a week after they arrived, one of his friend's son went missing. This, according to Timothy, drove the soldiers into a frenzy, sending them rallying behind the agitated father, who was determined to find and bring his son back. All that is, except for my ancestor, who believed it was better to cut and run. Before anyone actually did anything, however, the soldiers confronted the local preacher, apparently wanting an explanation to whatever was going on. The journal doesn't expressly say what the preacher told them, but what is there was enough to really get me curious as to what was going on in the settlement. To quote from the journal, "The preacher has gone as mad as his flock. He speaks of madness and witches, of chants coming from the trees. He claims the people here are sick, that they know not of their own affliction. He speaks folly. I have seen what atrocities these sick commit when one crosses their path. No sickness I have seen imbues its victim with such impossible strength, such unmitigated fury. I know not if this witch he speaks of is true, but I have seen enough to dissuade me from lingering here. The others wish to stay, to brave the woods in search of our comrade's friend. They will march to their deaths, and I will not join them. I have instructed Agatha to pack our belongings and ready the children. We leave tonight. They may call me coward, and perhaps I am. But just as McDougal must do the best thing for his family, I must do the same for mine. God forgive me. At the time, the name McDougal jumped out at me immediately. You see, Damien had moved to a town with that same name about 3 years prior, when I was 17 and he was 20. So when I read that name, I instantly began to wonder if the two had any connection. I mean, what were the odds? Could my friend really have gone to the same place that my ancestor had walked over 150 years ago? Rather than sit and ponder such a possibility, I took to the internet and searched up everything I could on the name McDougal. Initially, I didn't come up with much of anything, save for some random online profiles and 1 or 2 landmarks bearing the same name. Unlikely as it was, I checked each and every one of these pages for any connections. After all, you can be amazed what you'll find in the most random of places. Eventually, though, that lead ran dry, but I didn't let that stop me. My next thought was to use various keywords in my searches, both exclusions and mandatory inclusions. This managed to get me exactly what I was looking for, leading to an odd web page that appeared to be a historical archive of the town. Aside from the various links and paragraphs, the page was mostly blank, save for an old-timey-looking photo of a trio uniformed soldiers, complete with era-appropriate rifles and mustaches. At least, I thought it was a photo at first. A closer look revealed it to be a drawing of the 3 men, albeit an incredibly realistic one. The caption underneath the drawing labeled them as Private Gully, Corporal Mulligan, and Sergeant McDougal, whom the page claimed that the town was later named after. I was ecstatic, more than a little eager to indulge in this rabbit hole I'd found. I spent the next several hours going over everything the page had available to read, from the town's humble origins as a getaway in 1801 down to the backgrounds of the 3 listed soldiers. My own ancestor was never mentioned by name, and possibly not even at all. The only indication I could find of his existence was a haphazard acknowledgement of an unknown 4th soldier who deserted. Admittedly, that kind of stung, and a part of me began to feel defensive for my recently discovered family member. Realistically, though, what would I have even been able to do? Complain in a non-existent comment section? Call some number the page didn't even list? So, I took it on the cheek and just tried to keep reading. The more I read, the more I began to notice there were both similarities and odd deviations with what I'd read in Timothy's journal. Just like in said journal, the webpage claimed that the soldiers had arrived in the then unnamed settlement and noticed something distinctly off with its settlers, eventually culminating in the disappearance of McDougal's son and their decision to go after whatever was causing it. However, the page claimed that the soldiers had not been deserters from a war, but rather a sort of reconnaissance force, trying to explore more of the land. The page also never explicitly stated what was off about the settlers, only that they behaved strangely and unnaturally. More interesting to me, however, was that the web page never actually named what or who it was the soldiers went after, with the web page treating the story almost like an urban myth. Supposedly, what the soldiers actually fought in those woods had been lost to time, with the most prevalent theories being a particularly large black bear, a band of outlaws, and a pack of wolves. Whatever the case, McDougal would die in the fight, which is why the town wound up named after him. At no point, however, did the web page ever mention witches or madness like Timothy's journal did, even as a one-off theory. Now, I don't know much about witchcraft, as I never really had much desire or interest in diving into it, so I wasn't sure if trying to cover it up was something common back in the day. If anything, it seemed like exposing it and punishing it was the standard. I mean, just look at the Salem witch trials or literally any investigation during the Middle Ages. I also don't know if what was being described, that is, forcing someone to repeat the same thing over and over, was even something possible with witchcraft. But the more I thought about it, how few answers there were between the journal and the web page, the more I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was just because my friend was living there now, but I needed to know what had happened in McDougal. About a week before the town vanished, I managed to get some time off from school and from work. After a few calls back and forth with Damien, I managed to set up a hangout during which I would stay with him for the week. I didn't tell Damien about the journal or that I was really heading up there to try and make sense of what I'd read. Even looking back on it now, I realize how absurd it sounds with no context. Heck, if it weren't for the whole place disappearing, it still probably would. I arrived in McDougal on the morning of April 22nd after a roughly 2-hour drive from home. The best way I can describe McDougal is that it looked rustic and almost stereotypically outdoorsy. Most of the buildings looked they had been hand-built with bricks, logs, and other more natural building materials. Any signs that marked important locations like a store, hospital, or police station looked hand-painted, with no signs of a neon light anywhere, or anything electrical for that matter. The only indications that I was in a modern town at all were the small patchworks of telephone wires and street lamps throughout. Well, that and the cars everyone was driving. I'll admit I took a liking to the place almost immediately. It was warm and inviting in a way most cities or towns aren't. And honestly, it just seemed peaceful. Kind of an ironic thought, considering. I won't bore anyone with details of that first day, as nothing really happened. Since I hadn't told Damien of my main reason for being here, I spent most of it unpacking, catching up, and convincing Damien to show me the local sites. It admittedly felt a little dishonest not telling him the whole truth, but I reasoned that since I actually had missed him and wanted to catch up, it wasn't like I was lying. I was hanging out with him, making sure he was okay. And if I learned a bit more about the place he lived, that was a bonus. The day after I arrived, however, was Sunday. For reasons I won't go into, Damien lost his faith around the same time he moved, and from what I understood, hadn't been to church even once since he left home. Most days I was sad for him, and silently prayed that one day he would rediscover his belief in God. That day I selfishly hoped for the opposite, and was relieved when he informed me he wouldn't be attending even after I offered to go with him. This would give me the chance to ask around a little bit, see what I could learn about McDougal from a local or two. So, after changing into a nice button-up shirt and a pair of black dress pants, I bid Damien farewell for a time, and promised to meet up later at a local favorite of his, a diner and bar called the Whopping Catch. The church I went to, Hope and Sanctuary, was located in the center of town, and I arrived by 9:42 a.m. The church was a small one, being only one long room with 2 rows of wooden pews leaving a small walkway, which was decorated with a blue carpet. A small stairway led up to an elevated stage, where a wooden podium decorated with a wooden cross stood proudly in center stage, along with 2 more elevated steps behind it, presumably for the choir. A set of 2 medium windows on the sides of the building allowed sunlight to pour in from the outside, and 9 plain purple banners hung from the back of the church, each carrying golden lettering of a fruit of the Spirit, with another thin golden outline depicting an image associated with said fruit. For example, there was a wedding ring for faithfulness, a heart for love, an open hand for gentleness, you get the idea. It was a nice little place and shared the same homey feeling that the rest of the town did. It saddened me then when I realized that there were only about 24 people actually present. Maybe I was just used to church in my home city with maybe 100 or so people. But this looked like too small of a gathering for such a little town. I wondered if maybe there were other churches in town that had more people. Maybe people were out hunting or something and just weren't able to make it. Regardless, I did my best to introduce myself to the few churchgoers before service, who were all genuinely polite and seemed to instantly notice I wasn't from around. The service began about a minute after 10 o'clock and was led by a sharply dressed man that looked to be in his late 40s or maybe early 50s. His face was mature and slightly wrinkled, with small but noticeable streaks of gray in his brown hair, mustache, and beard, and he wore what looked to be simple glasses that rested comfortably on his nose. Although the man didn't formally introduce himself before or during the service, it was easy enough to identify him as the pastor. The sermon itself focused mostly on the Apostle Paul, something that felt oddly personal for reasons that, again, I won't go into. After service concluded, I lingered around the church for a while, introducing myself to a few members of the congregation. While I did genuinely want to socialize, my primary goal was to try speaking with the pastor, who was currently going through a small group of people who looked to be speaking with him. My reasoning was that as a pastor of a local church, he probably had at least some grasp of the local community and knew who I could talk to so I could learn more about McDougal itself. If I was lucky, he might even be willing to introduce me to some of them. After a few minutes, the pastor seemed to make it through the small crowd, and seeing my chance, I casually approached him with a smile. "Good morning, Pastor, great sermon," I said politely, extending my hand as he turned to face me. He wore a kind smile on his face, and he even seemed to light up a bit when he saw me. "Hello there, young man, and thank you. Pardon me, but I don't believe I've seen you around here before," he replied in a deep but gentle voice as he took my hand and shook it. The question in his statement was polite but clear, so I answered. "No, sir, I'm from out of town, visiting a friend I haven't seen in a while." I quickly realized that I hadn't actually introduced myself, so I quickly threw in my name. "I'm Sam, by the way." The pastor nodded and folded his hands in front of him. "Well, we're happy to have you this morning, Sam. I'm Pastor Mulligan." My heart stopped for a second. Had I just heard that right? Mulligan? "Pastor Mulligan?" I asked, in an admittedly confused tone. The pastor waved away the question and almost seemed embarrassed. "I know using the last name is a little formal. It's just something we've done here since the church was founded," he explained. "No, that's fine. It's just, wasn't this town founded by a Corporal Mulligan?" I asked. I don't know why, but part of me expected his demeanor to change, to suddenly become more serious or threatening. Instead, he remained just as polite as before. He even seemed to look somewhat impressed. "I see you've done some research, young man. Technically, the town itself existed before he arrived here, but yes, he was familiar with the man that it was later named after. And since I'm sure you'll ask, I am a distant relative of his," he explained. I could hardly believe my luck. What were the odds I'd run into a descendant of one of the founders of town? Or, I don't know, key figures. Whatever the correct term was, I was ecstatic. If he was immediately familiar with what I was talking about, maybe he knew more than I had hoped. Maybe I could get my answers right here and now. Luck stayed on my side, as after I explained the second and primary reason why I was here, the pastor was exceptionally gracious to me, offering to answer any questions he could. I'm not sure exactly how much of our conversation is relevant to current circumstances, but I'll try to go through everything that sounded important. I started by asking what happened to the 3 soldiers and their families. Well, mine is the only one of the main 3 still around. The McDougal name effectively died with the sergeant, and frankly, I can't recall what families his daughters married into. As for the Gullies, they left town not long after fighting whatever was in the woods that day. No one has seen or heard from them since, he explained. It wasn't really what I'd meant with the question, but I was interested to learn it nonetheless. I considered informing him that I actually knew someone with the last name Gully, but it didn't really seem relevant, and I knew that would probably just get us further off topic. "That's cool that your family stuck around. Are they kinda like royalty here?" I asked, in an attempt to course correct. "No, not really. If anything, we try to keep ourselves humble. After the preacher died, the good corporal stepped in to become the town pastor. Ever since then, we've been serving the community in one way or another. My grandfather and uncle were both the pastors here before me. My father was a cop, that sort of thing. Even then, the thought occurred to me that pastors and cops are positions of authority, but maybe he was just referring to government stuff. I don't know." "You don't help run it at all?" I asked. Pastor Mulligan shook his head. "Nope," he said, before pausing a moment. After a second of contemplation, He raised a finger and amended his statement. Well, technically that's not true. I guess my grandmother used to organize things for tourists, if that counts. I remember she was really proud of herself for making a web page back in the day talking about the town. Again, what were the odds? That's actually what led me here. I think I found that page. Pastor Mulligan chuckled. How about that? I'm sure she'd be thrilled to know she got one last person to visit. I don't know why, but something about the phrasing of that shook me the wrong way. One last person? I questioned. The pastor sighed and crossed his arms as he looked out towards one of the windows. Yeah, the tourism thing kinda died a little over 20 years ago. Broke my poor grandma's heart, he admitted. I immediately felt bad for being shaken. Oh, I'm so sorry. What happened? Well, word spread that there was weird stuff going on in the surrounding woods. People got spooked and just stopped coming. Eventually, we just shut down the whole tourism thing altogether, and poor Grandma just had to find something new. I felt my chest tighten a bit as he explained. What kind of weird stuff? I asked, worried I wouldn't like the answer. All sorts of things, really. Chanting late at night, nightmares, doing things in their sleep, that kind of thing. Some people claim to see these blue lights somewhere in the distance, but I'm pretty sure those were just meant to scare people more. By this point, I hadn't even realized that the church was almost completely empty now, save for me and the pastor. My mind was spinning with every word he spoke, darting back to the descriptions given by my ancestors' journal. Admittedly, the blue light thing was new, but I distinctly recalled the preacher in Timothy's journal mentioning strange chants in the woods, and Timothy himself mentioned having nightmares. Was there any chance these two things were connected? If so, why was there more than a century between them? Suddenly, this place didn't feel so warm or inviting. Didn't something similar to that happen before? I asked. Pastor Mulligan must have noticed me becoming frightened, because his expression shifted to one of concern as he raised a hand to calm me down. Easy, son, it's just some local folktales, don't let it get to you, he said reassuringly. No, I mean, weren't those things that happened when the soldiers arrived here? They said the same thing, didn't they? The pastor's expression changed again, this time to one of confusion. What do you mean? He asked. I explained everything, the journal that my mother had given me, what I'd read, my concerns, everything. The pastor, God bless him, never once interrupted me, just listened as I shared what I'd learned and how it lined up all too similarly to what he was describing. When I asked if these weird things were still going on, the pastor even confirmed that a few locals would complain about it every so often. I asked what it was the soldiers fought that night, and when he admitted that he didn't actually know, I gave my theory. Witches? I seriously doubt that's what's going on. I wouldn't put too much stake in urban legends, Sam. We're okay here, really. He tried reassuring me. I wanted to stay and ask more questions, but by then it was almost noon, and I had to say goodbye in order to keep my planned meeting with Damien. So it was with a slight hint of regret that I parted ways with Pastor Mulligan, wishing him a good day, and he the same to me. Even as I left, however, I couldn't help but think about what he had told me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I thought I might be able to doze off, I'd start thinking about chanting in the woods, what my ancestor and those tourists must have heard all that time ago. I even thought I was hearing it myself at one point. What did it mean? Did I really think that my ancestor, or rather, the preacher's idea of witches was really legit? If it wasn't, why were locals still hearing chanting from the woods? Why were they seeing some blue light? That's when an idea hit me. Stepping outside of Damien's home, I watched the dark shadows in the trees, listened to the sounds of a night as I stood outside, heart pounding. At first, I didn't see or hear anything, just the rustling leaves shaking in the wind. I chastised myself for getting so worked up. You're being ridiculous. There's nothing there, I said to myself, hoping that I would somehow convince myself it was true. A thread of doubt lingered, however, and even as I shivered in the cool night, aching to go back inside, I stayed. I'm not sure how long I stayed out there, but It was long enough that my legs started aching. I was about to give up and walk back inside when I saw it. To the right of the house, barely visible between the cracks in the trees. Amidst a deep blue and gray sky, no stars in sight, was a haunting blue light. I've never seen the northern lights or anything like it, but it's the only way I can think to describe it. A thin, wavering blue stream dancing in the sky. As it softly danced, I could hear what sounded like a soft humming, very so often broken by a strange language I couldn't recognize. I kept thinking that this couldn't be possible, that I had to be dreaming or something. I even pinched my arm hard enough to draw blood with my nails. The lights never went away, just gently waved in the sky. The chanting continued in a rhythmic and darkly melodic tune, almost seeming to direct the light, if that makes sense. When it went higher, the light seemed to ascend, and when it was deeper, it seemed recede deeper behind the trees. My phone, I realized. I needed to record this with my phone, show people what was going on. I must have been gone for a minute or two at the most, but when I charged back outside with my phone in hand and camera ready, they were gone. The lights and chanting, both gone just as quickly as they'd arrived. I stood motionless for a long time, my heart pounding as I waited for them to return, but they never did. As I stood there, I wondered what I should do. I thought about leaving then and there. I wasn't sure if it was a witch, my mind playing tricks on me, some practical joke. I didn't know. All I knew was that I wanted to go home, curl up safe in my own bed, to hug my mom and my dad, warn people never to come here. I'm sure some of you might even wonder why I didn't. Well, it was because of Damien. Damien, my friend, lived here. I couldn't just leave him, right? I had to explain this to him, but how? He'd already renounced his faith. How was I going to convince him there was something like a witch in the woods, assuming that's what it even was? I didn't even know for sure, I still don't. He'd need something concrete, I realized. I needed video evidence. I tried staying up late to get evidence of the light or the chanting for the rest of my time there, blowing off any time Damien questioned why I seemed so tired all the time, why I was suddenly so shaky. In hindsight, maybe I should have told him. Maybe he would have believed me. I don't know. The light never showed back up, and even though I swore I heard chanting a few times, I never heard anything when I played back the videos on my phone. The day before I was set to leave, I still didn't have anything to show him, and by then it was already too late. A local tried to leave that morning to visit a relative that lived in the next town over, came back screaming that everyone was gone. I tried calling my mom, my dad, anyone, but I couldn't reach them. I knew immediately it was true. If it's all the same, I really don't want to talk about my drive home, then back to McDougal. I still have nightmares about it. I'm sorry there's nothing concrete here. I know how absurd the idea of witches and some weird spell sounds, but it's all I've got. I know there's more to tell too, but this post is getting really long, so I have to cut it off here. If anyone's interested, maybe I can convince Damien to document our next expedition outside of town, or to go with me deeper into the woods, see if we can find something more solid. Until then, to those of you just arriving, please be safe. If you need anyone to talk to, you can find me at Hope and Sanctuary every Sunday, and probably at the Whopping Catch every weekday when I'm not out gathering supplies with Damien. I can also answer your questions here if that's more comfortable for you. Really, whatever works. Sorry, I'm rambling. Just stay safe, please. And God bless you. We definitely need him in here.